It's funny. I was just telling my friend about the new season of The Crown dropping
Hmm.
and how Netflix always seems to know what shows will be hits.
Mm.
And it turns out it's not magic, it's statisticians. They use something called, what was it called? Predictive modeling.
Yeah, predictive modeling.
Right. By analyzing tons of data about, like our viewing habits to figure out what we want to watch.
Exactly.
So that's what we're diving into today, statisticians, these data wizards who are kind of secretly shaping the world. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And, well, thankfully, we've got this career guide from RoleCatcher to help us break it all down.
Yeah, they're great.
So, I mean, it is kind of amazing how much we just take for granted the role of statisticians, right?
It's true. I mean, a lot of people think of them as just, human calculators. Yeah, just crunching numbers all day.
Stuck in some basement somewhere.
Right.
But really, they are taking that raw data and, like you said, turning it into those actionable insights that are driving decisions in literally every field, from healthcare to entertainment and everything in between.
Okay, so it's really about finding the story that's kind of hidden in the data.
Yeah.
But RoleCatcher also talks about what it actually takes to be a statistician.
Right.
And they have this section, pros and cons, where they really emphasize that this is not a field for the.
For the faint of heart.
Right, exactly.
You really have to have that intellectual curiosity
Yeah.
and this drive to just constantly be learning and exploring new data sets, always asking questions. And of course, like you said, you need a very strong foundation in mathematics and just analytical thinking in general.
Of course. But if you've got that, the rewards, they can be substantial,
Sure, for sure.
both intellectually and financially, which is nice. It's a growing field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes sense because I guess knowing what questions to ask is almost as important as being able to find the answers in the data. Right?
Oh, absolutely. If
Yeah.
you don't know where to look, you're never going to find anything useful.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, what is that quote? Torture the data long enough and it'll confess to anything.
Yeah, you don't want to torture the data. You want to have a conversation with it,
Right. Statisticians need to be the detectives, not the
not the torturers.
not the torturers. Okay, but let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's not all equations and late nights, is it?
Hopefully not. Every job has its moments, but
Right. So what does RoleCatcher say about, the day-to-day realities of a career path like this? Like, where do you even begin?
yeah. So RoleCatcher actually breaks down that whole career path really well and kind of shows how you can go from entry level all the way to, becoming like a senior statistician who's leading those big projects.
Right.
But no matter what stage you're at, like having those core skills is just, it's essential, right?
Okay, so let's dig into some of those skills. RoleCatcher mentioned mathematics as being like an 82% match, which makes sense. But for those of us who haven't opened a calculus book in a while,
Right.
can you break down what do those math skills actually look like for a modern statistician?
Yeah, so it's actually less about like memorizing all these complex formulas and more about how you use that mathematical logic, that kind of thinking, to then see the patterns and I guess even the possibilities within data.
Okay.
So, for example, imagine you're a statistician working for Spotify. Okay.
Okay.
You could use what's called regression analysis to analyze listening data and then predict which new artists are going to be popular.
Hold on, back up. Regression analysis, that sounds kind of intimidating.
It's a really powerful tool, but it's not as scary as it sounds.
Okay.
So think about it this way. Imagine just trying to figure out, is there a relationship between how many hours you study for an exam and what your score is on that exam?
Right.
Regression analysis would be what helps you find that connection, figure out, okay, is there a positive correlation, a negative correlation?
Got it.
And so for Spotify, they're looking at all sorts of factors like your listening history, what's being shared on social media, even what playlists songs are appearing on to then say, okay, we think this song's going to be a hit.
So it's really about finding those relationships that wouldn't necessarily be obvious just from looking at, just a giant spreadsheet of numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that critical thinking comes in, which RoleCatcher actually lists as a 70% match, which is even higher than some of the more technical skills.
Yeah, that makes sense because you could have, all the data in the world, but if you don't know the right questions to ask, it's kind of meaningless, right?
Yeah.
Totally, 100%. It's about really looking at that data with a critical eye, questioning those assumptions.
Right.
Considering different perspectives.
Yeah.
So for example, let's say that you're a statistician and you're analyzing some data about a new drug trial, okay?
Yeah, okay.
You need to be able to spot any biases in the way that that data was collected, right? So let's say that they only included participants from a certain age group or from a certain demographic.
Right.
That could really skew the results, which then leads to these misleading conclusions.
Right. So you really are, you're like a data detective.
Yeah.
You're making sure the evidence actually, adds up.
Exactly. Yeah, you're finding the story, you're making sure that it's an accurate story that the data is telling.
And speaking of story, this is something that I think might surprise some people listening.
Okay.
Communication skills. Like, that is crucial for statisticians.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't know why. I always pictured statisticians just like solo, surrounded by spreadsheets.
Just like in the dark,
Yeah.
hunched over their computer.
Exactly. But that's not the
And
reality.
so not the reality. They actually have to be incredible communicators because you might be writing reports for your team, presenting those findings to clients who don't necessarily have any kind of background in statistics.
Right.
Or even explaining this really complicated data to the public through visualizations, through charts and graphs.
Yeah. So you're not just crunching the numbers, but you have to then make those numbers sing, right?
Yes, you got to make them sing.
And I noticed RoleCatcher listed like reading comprehension, writing, and speaking skills like 70%, 63%, and 61% matches, respectively.
It's huge.
So clearly communication is key.
Oh, 100%. It's essential. And, to help make those numbers sing, especially with the just like massive data sets that we're dealing with these days,
Right.
programming skills are becoming more and more important.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
You can't just do it all by hand anymore.
Right. You need those tools.
Yeah.
And I noticed the guide mentions programming as, as being a key skill, and specifically languages like R, Python, SQL. What makes these languages so important for this kind of work?
Yeah, it's like a whole other language you got to learn just to even, approach this stuff.
But RoleCatcher also, they do a good job of breaking down the career path itself, which, I mean, that can seem very daunting for someone who's just starting out, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So where do you even begin? Like, how do you take those skills and actually start putting them to work?
So RoleCatcher, they have this great way of showing how you don't have to jump into the deep end right away.
Right.
At the entry level, think of it more like an apprenticeship.
Okay.
Where you're really getting your hands dirty with those real-world data sets. You're working alongside those more experienced statisticians. You're really starting to master those essential software tools we were talking about.
So you're learning by doing.
Exactly.
You're seeing how all those like theoretical principles actually play out.
Yeah, exactly. You're seeing how it works in the real world with real projects. And then, as you start to gain that experience, that confidence, you naturally kind of progress into that role of like a junior statistician.
Yeah.
That's where you start taking on more responsibility. Maybe you're conducting your own analyses, maybe even designing experiments, building those predictive models that we talked about earlier.
Right. So it's like leveling up, like in a video game.
Exactly.
You're getting those new skills, tackling those bigger challenges. But, statistician, that still seems like a pretty broad term. Are there like specializations within the field?
Oh, tons. And finding that niche, that's a huge part of being a junior statistician. You might find, for example, that you're super passionate about biostatistics, right? Using all that data to solve those problems in healthcare, maybe. Or maybe you're more drawn to finance, where you're building those models to analyze those market trends.
Because I noticed RoleCatcher, they actually have those little, what do they call them? Those example profile snippets
Yes.
for each stage. And it's almost like getting to peek behind the curtain, right?
Absolutely.
And see what a day in the life of an actual statistician looks like.
Yeah, and I think those are so valuable because it's one thing to read a job description, right? But it's another to hear from someone who's living that, who's breathing that every single day. And it gives you a much more realistic picture of what that day-to-day work actually looks like. You can see the types of projects you might be involved in, what are the challenges you might come up against, what are the skills that you need to really succeed.
And eventually you kind of work your way, up the pyramid, so to speak,
Right.
to that senior statistician level.
That's right.
And now we're talking like leadership roles, right? You're guiding the direction of projects, you're mentoring those junior statisticians. Maybe you're even a thought leader in your particular area of specialization.
You got it. You might be out there presenting at all the conferences. Maybe you're publishing those research papers. You might even be consulting with companies, helping them to solve those really challenging data problems. And at that point, your expertise, it's in high demand.
Right, because you've really seen it all. But I do want to touch on something, because I think no matter how much experience you have, what your skills are, there's still that one hurdle that everyone has to face, which is the job interview.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. And RoleCatcher has a whole section on that too. And it's not just like generic advice, is it?
No, not at all. They really emphasize that you have to showcase your passion for this field
Okay.
and show them how you use your problem-solving skills.
Right.
And it has to be in a way that's tailored to that specific role that you're interviewing for.
Oh, that's a good point. So you can't just have like a generic resume. You really have to speak to their needs.
Exactly.
And I did like how they had that one example interview question, something like, how would you explain a complex statistical concept to someone with zero background in statistics?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. Because that really tests your ability to not only understand it yourself, but to communicate clearly.
Absolutely. And to make it accessible to anyone. And that is such a crucial part of being a statistician. You have to be able to bridge that gap between this like foreign language of data, right?
Yeah.
And actual understanding, no matter who your audience is.
That's a really good point.
And RoleCatcher actually goes a step further, and they offer this AI-powered interview practice tool
Oh, wow.
that actually gives you personalized feedback on your responses.
So it's just having your own personal coach, right?
Pretty much. In your pocket. Which is amazing, especially in such a competitive job market.
Well, listen, I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive.
I think so, too.
We talked about what statisticians actually do, the skills that are important, how you climb that career ladder, even how to ace the interview. I mean, it's clear that this field, it's constantly changing, right?
Always evolving, yeah.
There's always going to be new challenges, new opportunities. So for anyone listening who's maybe a little intrigued by the power of data and wants to make a real impact, this might be the path for you.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of statistics.